Oh, I think recording started. Hi, Ben.
Yes. Hi, Norman. How are you?
Good. So I propose two topics which are, really based, especially the first one. The second is connected to that because yesterday, the outgoing President Biden, who really, not he, but he said they call him President Cabbage. He is just a plant. But the people that manage him, who are very nasty people, they arranged a preemptive pardon for several people, including Anthony Fauci. And I would like to start with that, especially that I know Fauci from 1986. So I go quite a long time. And because we used to go to, both of us, that means me and my wife, to all kind of AIDS meetings, because I worked peripherally with AIDS until maybe 89. When I moved to the CDC, I started to work with opportunistic infections. But my wife worked already in New Orleans with not only with adenoviruses, but also with HIV/AIDS. And then at the CDC for 23 years, she was, and I was working with her a bit as well. She was first a molecular epidemiology in AIDS, and then she was, for the last 5 years of her work, she was an epidemiologist in collecting molecular data, because she understood that very few other these epidemiologists knew anything about the sequence and their meaning. So you have to be a molecular biologist to understand that. So we know Fauci for a long time, and just when we started in the late 80s, and this continued for about 10 years, there was a very big story, which not many people remember that, and unfortunately Wikipedia, that's biased, very biased, so they don't tell the truth. We remember this very, very well, so at least I remember. And the problem was that NIH, it's this National Institutes of Health, several institutes, and the same as CDC. When I started to work at the CDC, this was Centers for Disease Control. The original name was Centers for Disease Control, or for a short time it was called Communicable Diseases Center. But from, I think, the 80s, end of 80s, it was Centers, like National Institutes. So Fauci was the head from early 80s, I think, of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, it was called. And there was Robert Gallo, who was the director, not the director, but he was in the National Cancer Institute, NCI. And the great contribution to HIV/AIDS and retroviruses was that this Robert Gallo discovered the first human, let's say, cancer viruses, which are retroviruses. They are very rare, and these are not cancers that, although I know a guy whose wife is from the Dominican Republic, and she got leukemia caused by this human T-cell leukemia viruses. And Gallo described several of them, and he was a very good molecular biologist. He had a very good team. And at some point, Luc Montagnier from the Pasteur Institute noticed that there is a disease in Congo that's caused by a virus, but they were not molecular biologists and not very good virologists. So he could not really say what kind of virus it was. And they called this virus LAV, LAV. And Montagnier sent a sample because it looked, on electron microscopes, micrographs, it looked like the T-cell leukemia viruses that Gallo was famous. And then Gallo forgot about this virus, then was sequencing this virus and established the sequence and found that it was similar to those human T-cell leukemia viruses. And he sequenced that and very quickly established the most important thing, that the disease that was known as gay cancer or AIDS is caused by this virus. So of course, Montagnier in some way discovered this virus, but could not really describe it. But very important role. But then Gallo found what disease this virus is really doing. So it was much better, very important work. Both of them had equal contribution. At that time, one could get a patent for the sequence. I don't know if that it changed several times due to all kind of, lawsuits and stuff like that. So at this point now, you cannot patent a natural sequence. But if you change it, you can.
You said the sequence changed over time, or just doing whenever they did a new sequencing run, the sequence changed, or
yeah. But that was because of the way this virus replicates. You get a swarm, but a swarm means that means the viruses are different in the swarm, but only very few can really cause disease. Most of them can still, let's say, those viruses can integrate, but most of them are failed because, this is not a very big virus, and it doesn't replicate very well because it goes through the reverse transcription, it cannot cause a disease. But this is not important because this is, if you work on the swarm, you see that. If you work on, let's say, viruses that you can isolate, my wife did a lot of that.
And by the way, I think that's the swarm. That's a very interesting point because I believe that. So I read a little bit about that too. That's with SARS-2, it's essentially the same thing, right? They say it's sort of the same effect where whenever they sequence. So the original sequencing they did in China with Professor Zhang, I guess he's called, and with I think the author was Wu and et al. They sequenced the sample, and it was a short read sequencing. So next generation sequencing with short reads, right? So if we think about these short reads, then if there's many viruses in the sample, then they have to. There's one step where they cut it down into small pieces. So we would get many different pieces from different viruses from the swarm, and would probably end up piecing them together. So we don't actually get a genome of a single virus. We get a genome probably of many different viruses.
No, to go around
like the same kind of virus, but like different entities.
But to get around it, what they do, they assemble it to a known sequence. So only if they find that this known sequence, let's say the sequence published by Wu, is very different, they don't care about that. But that's not important. But finishing with Fauci, Fauci used his connections to Congress, and it's hidden who really accused Gallo, but it's obvious that it was Fauci. Accused Gallo of stealing the virus from those French who sent him the virus. But of course, nobody liked Gallo, but Gallo was kind of, an obnoxious guy. But so what? He did very good research. So he was denied a patent because he was under investigation for theft. Then, in the middle of 1990s, the work on the HIV virus was discussed for the Nobel Prize. And Gallo was excluded, again, due to Fauci's intervention, which was, pulling strings behind the scene. And Montagnier himself, when it was, this is even on film, when it was announced that Montagnier and the lady that works with him got the Nobel Prize, Montagnier said, "Where is Gallo?" So you can see how bad was Fauci, and Fauci was universally. Nobody, at the beginning, nobody liked Gallo, but Gallo did great work, Bob Gallo. So Fauci was known as a mean midget because he is very, very, very small, and he was really very mean. And when I remember one meeting of this CROI, this was Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections in Washington, D.C., which was a hidden AIDS meeting. There was nothing about AIDS, retroviruses, but the president know what that is, so they wouldn't come in force. So when Fauci was speaking, people were laughing. So he was known as a very nasty guy, and then of course he did great science because he had access, like CDC, to very special samples, and he published. I sent you the papers, the very important paper on who died of what, because some samples are preserved during the Spanish flu, Asiatic flu in Spanish 1918, 1956, and the Hong Kong flu 1968. And he analyzed the samples, the tissue samples from the lungs, and published very good paper, 2008. That's not the ancient history. 2008, that people died of the bacterial pneumonia. And the conclusion from this paper that everybody knew, and suddenly everybody, including Fauci, the author of this paper, forgot in 2020. He said, if there will be another pandemic or epidemic of respiratory infections, he also moved out from saying that this was all flu, because he knew that most severe pneumonia has nothing to do with flu viruses, but with bacteria, of course, and rhinoviruses. So he said, if there will be a respiratory virus pandemic or epidemic, then we have to prepare for that, not by vaccines and not by using antiviral drugs which do not work. Confront this, what Fauci was saying in 2020. He was not mentioning what he did just 12 years earlier. He completely forgot. He, of course, developed a very close relationship with Pfizer and was saying vaccine, when 12 years earlier he said the vaccine is nothing. So that's why, if people would, because Fauci is attacked, as you know, from two angles. One is that he mismanaged the pandemic. And the other thing is that before the pandemic, he was financing the gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We did discuss that it's impossible to make any bioweapon, because if you have just the, let's say, no, the Wuhan virus is 30,000 nucleotides. Yes? In each position, you can have 4 different bases. Yeah. So the number of combinations is 4 to the power of 30,000. That's more than stars on the sky. So if you are now going to test which virus, really, you take a virus from somewhere, but you want to make it a human virus, testing would probably, you cannot plan nothing. You cannot plan how to change the virus, because even if you change it, thinking that that's the right thing, you have to test it. But how to test it?
And so exactly, I think, and coming back to, so you have that sequence, and so coming back to what I said earlier about the swarm, right? So like you have that. It's sort of like, I mean, they call it a consensus sequence, right? So like just thinking that we can now recreate from a consensus sequence, a single virus again, that then spreads, is also a stretch, right? To say, because if that sequence is coming actually from the swarm, then it's sort of like if we were to like take an average of all humans and then trying to recreate a human from that average, which leads me to a question that I want to ask you later on about the human genome, because that's essentially, in my understanding, what they're doing, right? But if we take an average of all humans and try to recreate that, is there a human really going to come out, or are we all sort of unique? I think that's the question. But yeah, but what do you think Fauci then actually did? So first of all, why did Biden pardon him from 2014 onwards? You said before that those
status of limitation.
Done anything wrong, then that's already.
If he killed somebody or whatever, unless it's said that this crime like, you know, there are some crimes that
major crimes,
yes, but crimes like, you know, this mass murder or something like that, and so it's different. But in most cases, and this is a civil case because you cannot, you know, get him on a criminal.
It's like it's policy based and
yes. But you know, policy based, you could still say, okay, you have to pay a fine of $100 million. That's civil. That's okay. But the way the pardon was written, and I think that Fauci was afraid that, you know, some things will come out in the 21st century, that they can get him on it. So the pardon is written that he's you know, I have seen it on Twitter somewhere. So I have.
I haven't read it. Well, there's two possibilities, right? It could be either that he has actually done something wrong, and I would like to hear from you if you have what are your thoughts on the specific things he did wrong that would carry some legal implications, or it could be simply a pardon that Biden issued just because, you know, some people are really angry out there and think like he created this lab virus that killed millions of people, and so sort of like just to protect them from revenge, I guess, right? So they could be that too,
but there is
from wrong.
But it's one thing that he definitely can be you know, sued for corruption, and that's it's giving Peter Hotez. You know who Peter Hotez is? He was very active in the media, the stupid guy with the bow tie. I know him very well from the early 90s, all the way, because he collaborated with one of my heads of the division, and he appeared very, very many times at the CDC because he was working on vaccines and methods to stop the so-called neglected tropical diseases, which of course CDC was working on. And some people at the CDC were sharing grants with him. That means Hotez was getting millions from the NIH. And Fauci should know, because the grants were from his institute, Fauci should know that Hotez never delivered anything. He never delivered a vaccine. He started to boast that he has a vaccine for the Wuhan virus. That's laughable because he published something.
It was a while when I read on his biography, but like I think he said that he developed a vaccine in Africa or somewhere, but it was never really rolled out. Nothing. Yeah, it was nothing major. Yeah, for sure. It seems almost to me that people like Hotez are essentially just sort of like really good salespeople for sales management in sales. You know, like it's sort of like in every big organization, when you go in, you get the mid-level and then top level, and people just become really good, just salespeople, like marketing people, you know, for the cause. They're good talkers, you know. I mean, could be.
Hotez, whenever he delivered a talk at the CDC, at my part of the CDC, which was, you know, dealing with tropical diseases, he was always somebody asking a question which was, you know, saying, look, where is the beef? And he was such a stupid guy, because he would say, at the end of my talk, there will be a time to discuss, and he never discussed it. Mm-hmm. So people saw that he was funny. But some important people, like the head of my division at the CDC, which is like an institute, he simply dipped into some money that Hotez was, because CDC could not apply for grants to the NIH. A government institution cannot get grants from the government because we are paid to do certain work. We had internal grants, but not that CDC would apply to the NIH. But Hotez, through all kind of, you know, let's say money laundering, would get some guys, you know, that they would get some money and something like that. This was clear. But his whole story, when he started to talk about viruses and and coronaviruses. That's obvious. Everything was so funny, and he is, just a funny guy. And he was one of the first that blocked me on Twitter, because I described what I know about him, and I understand that I had to keep my door closed and a revolver, not in a drawer, but on the top of my desk, because he's a very nasty guy. He's a very nasty guy. But I understand now he's not going to get a cent.
Under possibly Kennedy, maybe.
No. Bhattacharya is the head of NIH.
Bhattacharya, yeah.
Although Bhattacharya is not my, let's say, favorite scientist. Of course, he was very instrumental in this, Great Barrington Declaration. But he believes that there is natural immunity to respiratory viruses. And if you read the Fauci paper, he quotes, as common knowledge, that there is no immunity to. Nobody knows how we are getting
exactly. Yeah, we discussed.
And this reactivation, that's which we talked about that after months of isolation, somebody can develop a infection. No. So this is still absolutely unknown, how we get infected, how we get over the infection, why those viruses, if you really, very carefully look at the course of infection, why those viruses only infect actively for 5 days, well, 4 to 8 or something like that. But why so? What's happening? Why they are going away?
And only infect a portion of the population, right? Like we discussed in length last time, where we talked about the Diamond Princess, where only 9% of people actually got sick. So 91% of people didn't get sick, and I think 80-something% tested negative. So they didn't, and it was sold to us that it was a novel virus, and so it's crazy. So coming back to the one of the questions, well, let's see if so you're saying that the only way they could have gotten Fauci was through some money scheme, grants, or institutional.
Yes, that maybe he was getting some cutbacks. Maybe he was dipping into the money that he was giving to people.
Okay.
Because Fauci was, in Polish we have a saying that some people, if you spit in their face, they will say, "Oh, it's raining." So Fauci was exactly this guy. For instance, if his talk, because then, he started to work with AIDS in the late 80s and in the 90s, and he did some very good work. Although he is, accused of using poisonous drugs, that's all BS, because there were no other drugs, and there was
I think that's
need, the AZT, and this was
that's a very important observation. I think the problem is always that the public demands, right? There is a huge pressure from the public. The same in 2020 when the media went crazy on this, and there builds up a huge demand from the public, and people like Fauci, etc. They're essentially somewhat just responding to that pressure. Now, we don't know what internal things they have going on with the monies, with the grants or whatever, and those things could be, they could be part of like some litigation, like litigation or something. But like what a lot of people think is what he did wrong in 2020, like that he created like the bioweapon or whatever, like, or he killed people with remdesivir or something. Well, I as you said, I think like it's sort of like just a response to the panic, right? It's a response to the public overreaction in a way. I mean, we can't blame people for believing in it so much, I guess.
And you see, people never learn. So there is also a saying that history teaches only one thing, that it never ever taught anybody anything. So look, there was how many years? Almost 40 years saying, look, HIV, no problem. there is a vaccine just around the corner. There are vaccines for everything. Why not for HIV? And there's no vaccine for HIV, and it was known from the beginning of the epidemic. If you are infected and you will get cured in one way or another, then of course you should have immunological memory, and this would prevent the next infection. This is like with polio or with measles or very many other diseases, that, you know, if they infect your whole body, then because of that, the immune system gets interested and you get immunity. Yeah. But with HIV, no, you can get super infected with the same strain. Of course, then you cannot tell that, but with a very strain which is similar, you know. So there is no immunity, and the same, there is no immunity for coronaviruses or any other, you know, like Fauci explained in his 2023 paper. You can read between the lines, of course, that the flu vaccines, you know, they're absolutely inactive. They do not immunize anyone, especially people over 65. That's well known, and he writes that in the paper. But the
they're relatively mild, I would say, too, right? Like in the past, I got some flu vaccines. I never got more than just a sore arm. It's almost, you don't notice it. Like, I didn't get the COVID, so I don't know how that one. But I heard from people that it kind of knocks them out for a couple of days. So that supposedly was a really strong vaccine. Those mRNA vaccines.
No. It's
compared to the flu,
because it kills cells. So you have the whole body reacts to a foreign antigen being produced in the heart and in other places.
Exactly.
So
even in the brain.
So you have a very strong immune reaction because your immune system thinks that your whole body is infected with something. Yeah. It kills cells, which then there is a whole cascade of reactions. Yeah. But you see, the thing is that what Fauci says, that people have a memory that there was this very bad flu killer. Nobody says that this was pneumonia and not a flu virus, and that flu viruses cause, I think, only a fraction of really severe pneumonia. No? I had pneumonia recently, and this was probably a mycoplasma or something like that. But you know, I got doxycycline and I was okay. But you know, and pneumonia, if you get good antibiotics, which maybe those, you know, Z-Pak, which is azithromycin, or doxycycline, which is a very, you know, wide-ranging antibiotic. No, I think Z-Pak is better because it doesn't cause so many problems with upset stomachs like doxycycline. So this is probably should be the preferable antibiotic. But this instead of using antibiotics and anti-inflammatory drugs, which Fauci should suggest, I think he got payments from Pfizer to say no, only the vaccine, knowing that the vaccines do not work. He published that. He published that in 2023. Not that this is a new thing. That people knew that. If you are an immunologist, a pulmonologist, and you know what you were taught at medical school, you know that antibiotics work on pneumonia, and vaccines or antiviral, you know, those drugs do not work, you know, and none of them, you know, if you take, when I watch TV, Paxlovid, which is a two-drug cocktail from Pfizer, doesn't work at all.
It contains a former HIV drug, I believe, right?
Yes, yes.
It's a two-part.
That's also this what is it called?
Inhibitor. I think it's some inhibitor, I believe.
Yeah. But there is also this. I forgot. There is this other drug that's used that is very toxic. But this was not from.
Well, so basically, because like we discussed last time, 60 to and even like 80%. I watched this video of Professor Zhang from China. He even said 80% of the etiology is unknown of a pneumonia, right? So COVID mostly, I believe, represent itself as a pneumonia in people, right? So they get a lung infection essentially. So we know, and then it's believed it's caused by viruses, by the SARS-CoV-2 virus in this case. So they're trying to fight this specific virus. Instead, they should have maybe focused on the bacterial infection instead, right? And so suppression of suppression, maybe there's even, like, I haven't verified it, but there's some talk that maybe some antibiotics were suppressed, maybe, or people were said not to use that or something. Yeah.
This other drug that was given by a company, which Gilead, which this was a failed drug for Ebola, failed drug for HIV, and this was remdesivir. And interestingly, when the first patient 0 appeared in the United States, and this was in Snohomish in the northwest of Washington, a representative from Gilead appeared immediately and said, "Oh, this will be a very good drug," with no background that this is a good drug against coronaviruses. So this was already kind of, I think, their connections in China told them that maybe they will use this drug. But now a question is, okay, China, how come this ophthalmologist died? You remember
I remember. Yeah, well, I mean, everything that comes out of China is
fake.
It's suspect at the very least, because I actually tried to reach out to all the scientists from the Wu et al. Paper, and they never responded. So, like, there's no way to verify things. I believe one time I reached out to the China CDC to ask some questions. They never responded. So they just never respond. And there's no way to verify things. Like, I have asked the CDC, the RKI, to verify it. They didn't do anything. They just took that stuff from China, the published paper, and they took it for granted. And that's very strange. We should take things that come out of China with very high grain of salt, like with a grain of salt, for sure.
But you see, the thing is that under new leadership, the CDC now will work very different, and it's not only that finally some documents on the assassination of JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King, because why papers on Martin Luther King assassinations are kept secret? Maybe really some Soviet operatives were doing that, because this is the only reason that a foreign country that United States didn't want to go to war with, like, with JFK, is obvious that the assassin was a Marine who defected to the Soviet Union, and then a week, I think, had a Russian wife, and a week before killing John Kennedy, he went to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City for some last-minute instructions. And then this Ruby who killed, Oswald he was a Soviet operative during the Spanish Civil War. And so, it's all kind of coalesces. But of course, I agree that publicizing that when Kennedy was killed would be, casus belli. The United States would have to react in some way to the Soviets. But MLK, I don't think this would be a casus belli that the United States should go to war with Soviet Union. So I am very interested, especially MLK, because the RFK, Robert Kennedy, he was killed by a Palestinian, and of course this was after the 67 war, so 1967 war. So this is in some way that the Palestinians were very, let's say, anti-American at this point. But John Kennedy, I don't know what they are hiding. That means I suspect that they are hiding the true identity of the killer. But MLK, this is something that really very interests me because if this would be just a stupid, sudden, as I try to show, sudden member of the Ku Klux Klan, then of course why to hide it, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
I think we have to wait and see what comes out from that. I have a sort of like a distrust from these kind of reports and stuff. Like, for example, there was the committee on the pandemic, the report. I think that one came out, and you know, it's the same thing. Like, me myself have studied like the pandemic now for a couple of years, and like reading the paper, and some things are maybe accurate, some other things are not so accurate. So it always depends what the people that sit there want to have in the reports. So we don't know. I wanted to, in the interest of time, I don't know how much time you have, but I want to come back. So in the very beginning, you also said that about bioweapons. What do you think about bioweapons? What are the bioweapons that exist, and which bioweapons more exists in our thoughts rather than in reality?
You know, in late 1993, Clinton had this Partnership for Peace initiative. That means the Soviets opened that means this was Yeltsin now, they opened the archives of the biopreparat, the whole, you know, complex for making biological weapons. And the best institute in the biopreparat was a complex, was an institute called Vector, and this was in Akademgorodok, very close to Novosibirsk in Siberia. And maybe this was 98 when I was proposed that they would give me a grant for hiring some of the scientists that were working in bioweapons. I speak Russian, so I could speak to some of them on the phone. And can you imagine how we surprised the guy that was in Siberia, that we offered him a job at the CDC, of course, temporary job, and a ticket, a free plane ticket for him and his wife. He almost fainted. So you know, I got him, and then I got another guy who was from St. Petersburg, who was from one of the offices of biopreparat, I think. But he was a good molecular biologist too. So they worked, one of them worked very closely with me, and the other worked, let's say, in my sphere of interest at the CDC. So I talked to them a lot about that. And then after 9/11, that means 2001 and 2002, there were a lot of discussions about, you know, if Saddam Hussein has biological weapons.
Anthrax, I think. Anthrax, right?
Yeah, well, anthrax is not, you can send to somebody an envelope, but
that's more like a chemical weapon, right? Sort of. Like
no. It's simply impossible to infect. That means you can infect people, but you still have to give them through their lungs a lot of spores of this bacterium.
Right, bacterium.
Bacillus anthracis. But you know, one of these guys, I think this guy from St. Petersburg, told me, yes, they developed a program how to attack New York with anthrax, the whole city of New York. Send 1,000 747 Boeings loaded completely with anthrax, and 100 Russians that would, you know, use some kind of rakes or whatever to disperse it. And there is a chance that maybe 1% of New Yorkers will be killed. So this is not a weapon of mass destruction. If you, for instance, they said, oh, Saddam Hussein had a missile loaded with anthrax spores. Okay, it falls down here. And if they are within, let's say, 100 meters, a lot of people, maybe 5 of them will get infected and die. So anthrax is nothing. But they were, of course, a lot of good molecular biologists. They had a lot of equipment. And from the 70s, when molecular biology called genetic engineering appeared, they tried to modify all kinds of viruses. But they ran into a problem that's not solved until now. No way to solve it is you have to test a new virus that you constructed for 3 things. Does it cause morbidity? That means, does it make people very sick? Because a cold like with the Wuhan virus, this is not really something very bad. Does it cause morbidity? That means, will it kill some people? And the most important thing, if somebody gets infected, can he pass this bacterium or virus to another person? So three things. And
morbidity, mortality, and transmission, right?
Yes, yes. And you know what was they tried for quite a long time. I would say in the 80s, because they were saying, yes, we are working on that. They said, okay, we have to test it on people, but how? Somebody proposed, okay, we have the gulag, we can test on those people. But they said, look, if this will come out, we are dead. Because
in coming out, meaning it would spread out of the gulag, right?
No.
No, just the story comes out.
The story. You see, you can work on something, but when you start testing something that is going to kill people on people,
humans,
that's very bad. That's very bad.
Human experiments.
So they say they weaponize anthrax. So what? They can kill one person.
So that's a good point, and I was going to bring that up too. Like, so there are no human experiments that show that a biolab created pathogen is capable of transmission, right? So, I mean, we may argue, okay, maybe there are substances or biological entities that can make people sick. So the first morbid maybe would be, and obviously if they're very frail and maybe already, then it would kill them as well. But the transmission is the key component, right? So can it really transmit? And I mean, there are animal experiments, but like I've seen from the literature, first of all, it's very limited. You can only find probably about a handful of studies that sort of show that SARS-CoV-2 even transmits, but I don't think there are any for lab-created viruses. And secondly, it's also, these experiments are always very limited as well in size. So like they always have a very few amount of animals, and it doesn't show like they can transmit it like forever, basically. Like a couple of hundreds or thousands of animals, you know, in a big herd or something, especially in natural pathways.
You see,
it has not been shown.
You can add stuff to water, but why to add a virus to water, especially those viruses that will, you know, break into small pieces in water? You can simply add sodium cyanide, and that's it. You know, did you ever read about this Japanese death cult Aum Shinrikyo? This is very well described in Wikipedia. Aum Shinrikyo. So you can search for Japanese death cult. They, of course, first believed that the Soviets had not only a very good, you know, biological weapon, program, but also that they may get some biological weapons from the Soviets. And they went hunting, of course, paying a lot of money, and they had anthrax, they had ricin, they had several biotoxins, and they used it to, let's say, spread it out in the metro system, in the underground, and they tried to use it. Nothing worked.
Oh, okay.
Nothing worked. And then they went, you know, also to the Soviets to get the technology to produce a nerve gas that works. But they were so stupid, like most people, when they heard about biological weapons, oh, they exist, it's very bad. Now, one guy was writing, convincing me that there was a German microbiologist who created the Lyme disease and many other diseases. That's but you know, nature produces all kinds of nasty stuff. You know.
Yes. Yeah.
But those Japanese, of course, were caught because they killed several hundred people with nerve gas. That's not an unknown thing. It's a very bad substance. You know, the sarin.
Yeah. So there's a big, like, I know people always say as evidence, Lyme disease or maybe even HIV. Those things were supposedly lab created somewhere, and so they essentially they take these natural observable phenomenons, diseases, and they blame them on the labs. But that's not proof of that we can actually create pathogens that transmit in the lab. And one more thing I wanted to bring up. I think there's a really good video of I forgot the name of it. It's a professor, I believe, at some military college, and he described sort of like exactly that, where like they go into the subway, they spread some agents, and it makes people sick. People may not die, they just get sick really for a couple of days, and that spreads the panic. And I think maybe the whole thing is the belief that there is something really bad spreading, novel spreading. That is the real danger, I believe. And it's not actually there is the real disease underlying, of course, but that's happening, and it's always happening, sort of like, we can see this in the epidemiological charts, but like it's not like a mass casualty event. And we can see this, like if you look at Norway, look at Denmark in 2020, there is nothing compared to Sweden. It's weird. Like, why did Sweden get this like big spike in the beginning, and Norway, its neighbors, Norway, Denmark, didn't get anything? It's completely normal there. Well, we come back to the bacterial problem, because they probably didn't treat the bacterial pneumonia well, and they panicked, and
but you see this stories that maybe just something to cause panic, but this is all based on this idea that you can create some biological and then people do not have immunity to it. We have immunity to everything, because slowly we interact. You can imagine how many viruses get every day into your lungs. Because breathing air in and out, but this is like a sack, so it doesn't flow through. So a lot of stuff gets deposited in your lungs. But still, we're okay. We live, no?
Just like yesterday, I saw this tweet from Nature. They said that they just discovered, I think, 27 or 72,000 new viruses or something. So, like, as you said, there's a lot of different viruses, a lot of different new sequences, thousands of them. And it's just crazy when we think about it. They just identified that's one sequence and blame it from one person in China. I wanted to just quickly, with some time, wanted to bring up I want to hear your thoughts on the, all the talk about the vaccines, in quotes, right? Transfection. So that's, you said earlier, these are essentially well, you didn't say it, but like you said, they destroy the cells, right? And it's evident. There's this paper, I believe it was in Nature, I forgot the name now, but I can link it later. It says that the LNPs, the liquid nanoparticles are highly inflammatory, which means that if we just give these LNPs by itself to cell culture,
we coat them with PEG. They are coated, so they are not.
They're PEG. They're like some polyethylene glycol or something like that. And so just by themselves, they're already inflammatory. I'm not an expert on that. Like, I would imagine that's probably where cells get irritated and possibly even die. So that's when the body tries to repair the tissue. So that's the inflammation that we see. So then there's McKernan, who found the SV40 sequence in the vaccines, right? So, and that's apparently used in the production process. So now he goes out on Twitter and he tweets that now he says the blood supply, meaning the donations of blood, are possibly contaminated with that, implying that people that have been vaccinated, which is about 70-80% in this country and in the world, it's almost 70%, would essentially, I guess, produce this sequence or would still carry the sequence around. What's your thought on that? Like,
Kevin McKernan was a technician. He never completed, any graduate work. And his knowledge of biology, he was working for the Human Genome Project and now works for the drug cartels, getting, more potent strains of marijuana. So his knowledge of infectious diseases, immunity is close to zero. Because remember, there's a big group of people that believe that if you get vaccinated, then the vaccine can be excreted from your organism through those exosomes. So this is absolutely crazy. How something like that can survive, and how can so he believes that the vaccine can be transmitted from one person to another.
Yeah, shedding, right?
Shedding. They commonly use shedding, and he also believes, which is that's a very bad, let's say manipulation of sensitive people, that he found this DNA sequence in this colon cancer tumor.
Yes.
And this is he should be just kicked out of the any media, because this is impossible. But he did not really. People think that the vaccine is contaminated with DNA. No, it's not contaminated with the DNA, because this plasmid is used for production of the RNA, because this plasmid, they do it extracellularly. They use the FHT7 RNA polymerase to produce this piece of RNA. Okay, so then the plasmid is removed, most probably by treating with the DNAs, but there is no end point. So that means always something left. And if you use 40 cycles of RT-PCR, then you can find whatever you want, even if there is one molecule. But people do not understand that, and they think that it's a contamination. No, it's not a contamination. It's simply
so that's
the substrate was not removed entirely. And
that's why they have a threshold, right? That's why the EMA, I think the EMA from Europe, they have, or probably the FDA as well, they have a certain threshold. So that means that they don't even say that these products should be completely free of the DNA. So they already know it's going to be in there. And I believe other vaccines
that's obvious.
Also have that.
That's obvious. You never can have a reaction that's 100% complete. This is not how biochemistry works. So it's always something left. But then to saying that there is the SV40 virus, which from the old story, everybody who is crazy about biology and the danger, they read that the SV40 virus was a contaminant in the polio vaccine because it was done in monkeys. No. SV40 is not a human cancer virus. Nobody ever proved that SV40 can cause cancer in humans.
Exactly. To this date, it's suspected, right? That's what I read too. It's like it's suspected, but it's never been. It may be, but it's never been proven, as you said, right?
50 years looking for that.
Yeah.
So
exactly. No. Yeah. No, I agree. Like it's like at best it's a hypothesis, and that's the same thing with that basically they're saying now that because the SV40 is in there and it's supposedly cancerous, which it could be, but it hasn't been shown. It's supposed to create these turbo cancers, and so like I looked at the data, and we don't really see an uptick in cancers, especially like not even in the US, not even if we look at the multiple cause of death data. We also don't see it in Sweden. I think Sweden is highly vaccinated. Other countries, Denmark as well. Like it's
Portugal.
So I think it's
Israel.
Portugal. Yeah, I mean, like I'm not promoting it because I believe, like as we've worked out already, I don't think these products work in the first place, and I think they have caused some harm for sure. 300 deaths, I think, in Germany. That's at least what they've coded on the death certificate. I mean, it's rather minor number compared to what they claim COVID cost, but you know what I mean. In the end, as long as people make free decisions, I think it's their decision if they want to take that risk. But yeah, I think it's just you can't back it up with data. We can't back it up that we can't find the cancer signal in the epidemiological data, and it's strange. And like with so you mentioned that they seek. So I think there's two things. So like I think there's a Dr. or Professor Buchholz, I think is his name, from South Carolina. He did an experiment.
South
Carolina. So he did an experiment where he used a cell line and then he added some vaccine, mRNA vaccine on top of it. And then he let it sit or whatever. And then he did some, I think I read he did 3 or 4 washes after that. And then he said, well, after the 4 washes, essentially he's expecting that none of the vaccine is left, but then he goes in and sequences it, and then he still finds the ESP40. And it coming back to what you explained earlier, no reaction is ever pure or like complete, right? So we will always find some residue, and like I didn't see any controls as well. Like you would have to probably start doing some controls, like go in and use some other LNP mRNA mechanism that encodes for some other sequence and like repeat the process or something. Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, he went because I saw this video that you probably have seen as well. He went to the hearing at the committee of the South Carolina Senate, and he went in a lab coat. Since I think the 1990s, the code is that the lab code stays in the lab. You don't take it out. So if he works with viruses and stuff like that and appears in a lab coat, that means he's funny. You don't do that. He could be just in a shirt. He doesn't have to be in a suit and a tie, but never in a lab coat. So that's violation.
It's almost. It seems like a show, right? It's more like a show rather than
a show. And then he promoted vaccination of the vulnerable people. People that are over 60, for sure will not react to the vaccine. And even if they react to the vaccine, he should know from, let's say, the paper by Fauci, that these antibodies do not get to the lungs.
Exactly.
So this is well known. This is not something that Fauci discovered. Fauci wrote a perspective paper, and he described stuff that's known for 40 years. But this book calls like McKernan, they don't know the literature. They do not understand infectious diseases. They never worked on diagnosis of infectious diseases. Okay, I think I have to finish now. But I think we had a good discussion, and maybe next week, if nothing will be happening on my end or your end, we will meet again. So I also will start recording those videos, because I stopped them before Christmas. Those videos in Polish with my wonderful collaborator, this Magdalena. So this will be. But you see, I just as an aside, I uploaded to, when I heard that YouTube is let's say getting out of censorship, I uploaded our last week video to YouTube, and I have to keep my fingers crossed. They didn't even comment on that. So maybe new times. No,
I think they've achieved their goal. So for now, essentially, they're trying to normalize a little bit, so to give the impression, that they're not as bad as they are. But in the next crisis, it probably happens.
This communist mentality, communism, but also the daughters of communism, that means fascism and Nazism, they are very common among educated people, and they are that what I like is good, but when somebody else says something and I don't like it, it should be banned. That's the idea. And of course, people with extreme left ideology, they coalesce. So they think that they are the intellectuals, they should have power. But I think, at least in the United States, they were taught that, a lesson, and they should remember that. Now we will see what will happen with those, Kennedy was still, that means RFK Jr. was still not approved. But I am interested to know what Makary, Bhattacharya, and Kennedy will start finding at the FDA and at the CDC and at NIH, because this will be very, very important. I understand that they are going to make a lot of documents public, so we'll know what's happening. Okay, thank you very much, Ben.
Okay,
it's a
pleasure.
Thank you,
Norman. Yeah,
it's a pleasure. I hope we'll have more such discussions. Okay.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.